The chime of a hospital billing alert sliced through the freezing pre-dawn air of the bus stop like a blade through silk. Nyla Brooks' fingers trembled as she pulled her phone from the pocket of her thin coat, her breath hitching in a small, white cloud. The screen's harsh glare illuminated her smooth, deep brown skin and the single, crystalline tear tracking down her cheek. She almost didn't look. At this hour, notifications only brought the weight of Lagos hospital demands or the executioner's axe of her soul rent. But an ancient instinct whispered that this message, arriving from an unknown sender, was the bridge between her survival and her ruin. She was right. Because miles away, in a world where gravity seemed not to apply, someone was watching. Behind the floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass of a Gangnam penthouse, Park Min-jae, a man whose subtle neck tattoos hinted at a life of quiet violence, watched the same confirmation blink across his monitors. He had sent the bait, and now he waited to see if the beautiful American woman would walk into his dimly lit luxury to claim it. Nyla was about to ask for a miracle, unaware that the mafia boss didn't deal in currency, he dealt in souls. Welcome back to the channel, besties. I am bringing you another premium, high-stakes viewing experience. If you love dark romance and suspenseful crime dramas, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps my fire burning for these stories. The golden elevators of the Sheila Heights didn't just move, they glided with a silent, predatory grace that made Nyla's stomach drop. Standing in the center of the mirrored box, she caught her reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her deep brown skin looked luminous against the plush velvet walls, but her eyes betrayed the truth. They were the eyes of a woman who had spent the last 3 years scrubbing Formica tables and counting subway coins. She smoothed her coat, trying to hide the frayed cuffs that felt like a loud confession of her poverty in this world of bulletproof glass and silent power. When the doors whispered open, the contrast hit her like a physical blow. Her world was defined by the smell of grease, the hum of ancient refrigerators, and the flickering of dying streetlights. This world smelled of expensive sandalwood and cold, filtered air. The lobby of Park Min-jae's headquarters was a cathedral of glass and shadow, where every surface was polished to a lethal shine. Men in perfectly tailored black suits stood like statues at every door, their gazes intense and unreadable, mirroring the dangerous authority of the man she had come to see. Nyla's heels clicked sharply against the marble floors, a lonely sound that echoed through the vast, intimidating silence. She felt small, a forever foreign intruder in a fortress of wealth that could bend governments and bury secrets. As she approached the heavy mahogany doors at the end of the hall, she remembered her grandmother's voice whispering about the weight of stolen things. She wasn't stealing, she told herself, she was asking. But as she looked at the subtle neck tattoos on the guard who opened the door, ink that hinted at a life of violence, she realized that in this world, asking was just another way of surrendering. She stepped into the inner sanctum, where the lighting was dim and gold, casting dramatic shadows across the room. There, silhouetted against the pre-dawn skyline of Seoul, stood Park Min-jae. He didn't turn immediately, but Nyla could feel his power radiating through the room, a stark contrast to her own exhaustion and resolve. She stood upright and dignified, a single tear drying on her cheek, ready to offer the only thing she had left to save her mother, her future. Would you like me to write the dialogue for the intense face-to-face meeting in the next chapter? The silence in the office was heavier than the pre-dawn air outside, a thick, pressurized stillness that seemed to vibrate against Nyla's skin. Park Min-jae finally turned, his movement slow and deliberate, like a predator who knew his prey had nowhere left to run. He was even more striking up close, his features sharp and defined, framed by an expensive black suit that made him look like a shadow given human form. His eyes were the most arresting part of him. They were dark, piercing, and entirely unreadable, radiating a level of power that made the air in the room feel thin. Nyla stood her ground, her back straight and chin tilted up, clinging to the quiet dignity that was the only thing the city hadn't yet stripped from her. She could feel his intense gaze raking over her, noting the frayed cuffs of her coat and the dried salt of the single tear on her deep brown cheek. The tension between them was immediate and electric, a physical force that pulled at her, suggesting an imbalance of power that was both terrifying and intoxicating. He didn't look at her with pity, which she had expected. Instead, he looked at her with a clinical, dangerous curiosity, as if he were measuring the exact depth of her desperation. He stepped closer, the soft leather of his shoes silent on the silk rug, until the scent of sandalwood and something metallic, like the edge of a blade, clouded her senses. The subtle tattoos on his neck shifted as he tilted his head, the dark ink disappearing beneath his collar, hinting at the violence he commanded. Nyla didn't blink, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. In this dimly lit sanctuary, surrounded by wealth that could bend governments, she realized she wasn't just standing before a man, she was standing before the King of Shadows. "You are Nyla Brooks," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that resonated in the hollow space of her chest. It wasn't a question. He already knew who she was, her Lagos roots, her mother's failing health, and the exact number of one left in her bank account. The realization that she had been watched, selected even before she walked through those mahogany doors, sent a fresh shiver of dread through her. "I am," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotional weight she carried. She saw a flicker of something, perhaps amusement or respect, cross his calm, controlled features. He gestured toward the velvet chair opposite his desk, his expression remaining an unreadable mask of confidence. The deal was about to begin, and as Nyla looked into his piercing eyes, she felt the first chilling whisper of the unspoken cost she was about to pay. Park Min-jae sat behind the desk, the soft glow of the golden lamps casting a sharp light across his knuckles as he laced his fingers together. He didn't offer a drink or a greeting, he simply waited for her to speak, his presence filling the room with an oppressive, regal silence. Nyla felt the weight of her mother's medical bills and the 4-day eviction notice pressing against her spine like a physical burden. She took a breath, the sandalwood scent of the office mixing with the metallic tang of her own fear, and stepped forward. "I didn't come here to waste your time," she began, her voice gaining a resonance that surprised even her. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the medical estimates from Lagos, papers crinkled from being clutched too tightly on the subway ride over. "I need 50 million won." The number hung in the air, a staggering sum for a woman who lived in the world of cracked formica and sticky floors, yet she spoke it with the clarity of a woman who had already surrendered her pride. Min-jae didn't flinch. His intense gaze remained fixed on her face, tracing the path where her tear had dried. 50 million, he repeated, the words sounding like a triviality in his low baritone. "A high price for a waitress at a midnight diner." "It's the price of a life," Nyla countered, her quiet strength flaring in her eyes. She didn't beg. She didn't lower her head. Instead, she leaned into the vulnerability of her situation, exposing the raw necessity that had driven her to the King of Shadows. "I have no collateral. No property. Only my word, and the promise that I will do whatever is necessary to repay you." Min-jae stood up, his tall, tailored frame casting a long shadow that stretched toward her. He walked around the desk, stopping just inches away, his close proximity suggesting a dangerous bargain and an unspoken cost. The subtle tattoos on his neck seemed to pulse in the dim light. "Your word is worth nothing in my world, Nyla Brooks," he whispered, his voice dangerously close to her ear. "But your desperation, that has value." He reached out, his fingers hovering near her jaw but never quite touching her skin. "If I give you this money, you will no longer belong to yourself. You will belong to the debt. Do you understand the weight of what you are taking?" Nyla looked into his piercing eyes, seeing the high stakes of her decision reflected there. She thought of her mother's surgery and the executioner's axe, of her poverty. "I understand," she whispered. "I'm not asking for a gift. I'm asking for help. I'll pay whatever price you set." As Nyla reached for the heavy fountain pen resting on Min-jae's desk, the cold weight of the metal triggered a memory so sharp it felt like a physical touch. Suddenly, she wasn't in a glass-walled sanctuary in Seoul, she was back in the humid, spice-scented air of Lagos, sitting at her grandmother's feet. Her grandmother's voice, as sharp as broken glass and twice as cutting, echoed through the halls of her mind. The older woman had always looked at the world with eyes that saw through the thin veil of human greed, and her lessons were carved into Nyla's very bones. "What you take will take from you, child," the ghost of that voice whispered, cutting through the silence of the office. "A thief never sleeps soundly, never breathes freely. The weight of stolen things crushes souls." Nyla's fingers hovered just above the signature line of the contract. The paper felt like a live wire, sparking with both the possibility of her mother's survival and the danger of her own ruin. She thought of the 50 million won she was about to receive, a sum that could erase the rent looming like an executioner's axe and pay for the surgery her mother so desperately needed. But as she looked at the ink, she saw the unspoken cost her grandmother had warned her about. Min Jae watched her hesitation with a calm, unreadable expression that radiated power. He didn't rush her, he simply stood there, a man whose wealth could bend governments, waiting to see if that ancient instinct that had kept her ancestors alive would prevail over her current desperation. Nyla felt the internal battle raging between her Nigerian roots and her soul reality. She knew that by signing this, she wasn't just taking a loan, she was allowing something to be taken from her in return. The fluorescent hum of her memory faded, replaced by the dramatic shadows of the penthouse. She looked at Min Jae's piercing eyes and then back at the contract. Her grandmother had been dead for 5 years, but her words remained a warning against the dangerous bargain Nyla was about to seal. With a trembling hand, she gripped the pen tighter, the weight of stolen things already beginning to settle heavy on her heart. The silence following her grandmother's warning was broken by the dry scratch of the pen as Nyla finally signed her name. She looked up, the tear of sacrifice still shimmering on her cheek, to find Min Jae watching her with a terrifyingly calm and unreadable expression. The air between them was thick with unspoken consequences, a physical tension that suggested she had just walked into a gilded cage of her own making. "I have the money," she whispered, her voice a thin thread of resolve in the vast, dimly lit office. "Now tell me the price." Min Jae stepped closer, his tailored black suit casting a long shadow that seemed to swallow her whole. The subtle tattoos on his neck shifted as he leaned in, his proximity suggesting an intimacy that felt both dangerous and high stakes. He radiated a power that could bend governments, yet his tone remained a low, soothing baritone. "I promise not to touch you, Nyla," he said, the words smooth and polished like the bulletproof glass behind him. It was a suave assurance, a gentleman's lie designed to settle that ancient instinct, screaming in her gut. "I do not deal in the flesh of desperate women. I deal in loyalty, and more importantly, I deal in your unique perspective." He gestured toward the expensive documents on his desk, his eyes piercing and intense. "I have plenty of men who can pull triggers or break bones. What I lack is a ghost, someone who moves through this city as a forever foreigner, someone who sees the things my men are too powerful to notice." Nyla felt a flicker of relief, but it was quickly overshadowed by a haunting realization. While he promised not to lay a hand on her person, he was laying claim to her life, her time, and her conscience. He was offering her a job, a way to erase her mother's medical debts and the executioner's axe of her poverty, but the terms were written in shadows. "You will be my eyes in the places I cannot go," he continued, his calm confidence masking the hidden danger of the bargain. "Work for me, and the 50 million won is merely the beginning." Nyla looked at him, realizing that his promise was a silken trap. He might not touch her, but he was surrounding her, ensuring she was trapped in his dark world. She had asked for help, and he had given it, but the price of her freedom was already being extracted with every word he spoke. The transition from the quiet diner to the high-stakes underworld happened with a speed that left Nyla breathless. She had expected to be tucked away in a back office, perhaps translating documents or managing the digital trails of Park Min Jae's vast empire, but as the black sedan pulled up to a secluded warehouse in the Incheon docks, the unspoken cost of her bargain became terrifyingly clear. Min Jae sat beside her, his presence a calm but lethal weight in the luxurious leather interior. He didn't look at her as he spoke, his intense gaze fixed on the heavy iron doors ahead. "They won't talk to a man like me," he said, his low baritone cutting through the hum of the engine. "My face brings out their guns. But a woman like you, elegant, foreign, seemingly vulnerable, you are the perfect distraction." Nyla felt that ancient instinct of her ancestors screaming a warning as Min Jae's men handed her a small, weighted briefcase. She wasn't an employee, she was a shield. She was the face for a dangerous deal that Min Jae's reputation would have otherwise ignited into a bloodbath. As she stepped out into the damp, salty air, the dramatic shadows of the shipping containers stretched out like the ghosts of Lagos, reminding her of her grandmother's warning that what you take will eventually take from you. She walked toward the meeting point, her heels clicking against the wet concrete, a sound that felt like a countdown. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with the smell of rust and tension. A group of men stood waiting, their hands hovering near their waistbands, their eyes widening as they saw her. She stood upright and dignified, projecting a quiet strength even as her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wasn't just Nyla Brooks anymore, the waitress who counted coins for instant noodles. She was the property of the King of Shadows, a ghost moving through a world of violence. As she opened the briefcase to show the 50 million won, the realization settled over her like a shroud. She was now a vital part of the very machinery she had feared. The price of her mother's life was the slow, steady erosion of her own soul. 3 weeks later, the envelope in Nyla's handbag felt like a brick of lead, though it contained the salvation she had prayed for. Through a series of harrowing tasks and the sheer, terrifying luck of her ghost status, she had amassed the 50 million won. Every bill was a testament to a night spent in the shadows, every note carried the faint scent of Incheon salt and adrenaline. She stood once more in the golden, dim light of Min Jae's inner sanctum, her expression composed despite the emotional weight that had carved new lines of maturity into her refined features. She placed the envelope on the mahogany desk with a firm, decisive click. "The debt is settled," she said, her voice vibrating with a quiet strength that sought to reclaim the soul she had nearly bartered away. "My mother's surgery is paid for, and here is your capital, with interest. I'm done, Min Jae. I want my life back." Min Jae didn't even look at the money. He remained silhouetted against the Seoul skyline, the city lights reflecting off the bulletproof glass like cold diamonds. He turned slowly, his intense gaze raking over her, not as a creditor looks at a debtor, but as a king looks at a crown jewel he has no intention of relinquishing. The subtle tattoos on his neck seemed to darken in the dramatic shadows of the room. "You think this was about currency, Nyla?" he asked, his low baritone smoother than the silk of his tie. He stepped toward her, invading her space until she could feel the heat radiating from his powerful frame. He picked up the envelope and, without breaking eye contact, dropped it into the shredder beside his desk. The machine whirred, devouring her freedom in a mechanical growl. Nyla gasped, a single tear of frustration and fear tracking down her deep brown skin. "What are you doing?" "That was everything." "That was nothing," Min Jae whispered, his voice dangerously close to her ear, his breath hitching against her softly styled hair. "I can print that paper by the ton. What I cannot replace is the face that calmed a riot in Incheon. What I cannot buy is the dignity you bring to my side." He reached out, his hand finally closing the distance, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a possessive, unreadable calm. "The loan was the hook. Your presence is the price. You aren't leaving this world, Nyla. You are going to help me rule it." The realization hit her with the force of an executioner's axe. The "I promise not to touch you" lie had been a technicality. He didn't want her body, he wanted her soul as a permanent fixture of his authority. She was caught in a costly decision with no exit, a woman standing upright in a gilded cage, realizing that the man looming protectively behind her was both her savior and her jailer. The transformation was complete, but it felt more like a burial. Nyla stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, no longer the woman in the frayed coat who scrubbed grease from formica tables. She was draped in a floor-length gown of emerald green silk, the fabric shimmering like deep water under the warm golden glow of the chandeliers. The dress was a masterpiece of luxury, form-fitting and elegant, yet to Nyla, it felt as heavy as chainmail. She looked at her reflection in the glass, her smooth deep brown skin glowing against the vibrant green, her hair styled in soft, glamorous waves. She looked like a queen, but the single, crystalline tear tracking down her cheek told a different story, a story of sacrifice, of a deal sealed in the shadows of the King of Shadows. Behind her, the silent click of leather against marble signaled his approach. Park Min-jae moved with the effortless grace of a man who owned the very air he breathed. He stopped just inches behind her, his powerful presence looming over her like a storm cloud. He didn't touch her, he had kept that part of his promise, but his proximity was its own form of possession. In the reflection of the window, she saw him, sharply dressed in a tailored black suit, his features defined and intense, the subtle tattoos on his neck a permanent reminder of the danger that now guarded her. "The world sees a beautiful woman at my side," Min-jae whispered, his low baritone resonating against her spine. "They see the wealth, the emeralds, and the power. They don't see the price." Nyla closed her eyes, the ancient instinct of her ancestors finally falling silent, replaced by the cold reality of her gilded cage. Her mother was safe, the hospital bills in Lagos were a memory, and the executioner's axe of poverty had been stayed. But as she stood there, caught in the tension and unspoken consequences of her decision, she realized that Min-jae had been right. He hadn't needed to touch her to take her. By saving her life, he had woven himself into the very fabric of it. She was no longer a forever foreigner, wandering the streets of Seoul in search of a miracle. She was the miracle's captive. As the city lights of Seoul twinkled below them like a carpet of fallen stars, Nyla Brooks accepted her new reality. She was the face of a dangerous empire, the dignified woman standing in the center of a storm, forever tethered to the man who embodied both her salvation and her inescapable debt. The deal was done. The price was paid. And the cage was beautiful. Thank you for following Nyla and Min-jae's journey, besties. If you want to see more high-stakes dark romance, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe.